My name is Sarah, and I live in a small, quiet town called Greystone. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and life feels simple. But that all changed one cold November evening when the fog rolled in. It wasn't unusual to see fog in Greystone. Our town was surrounded by hills and woods that often trapped the mist. But this fog was different. It came out of nowhere, thick and heavy, swallowing the streets and houses like a living thing. I was sitting in my kitchen, sipping tea and reading a book when I first noticed it. The world outside my window had turned pale gray, like the air had turned to smoke. At first, I didn't think much of it. Fog was common this time of year. But as I watched, the fog seemed to grow denser, pressing against the glass like it wanted to come inside. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it just a crack to get a better look. The air smelled strange, damp, earthy, and a little metallic, like rain mixed with rust. I could barely see the street lamp across the road, its light faint and fuzzy through the haze. "Creepy," I muttered, closing the door quickly. I tried to go back to my book, but I couldn't focus. Something about the fog made my skin crawl. It was too quiet outside. No cars, no voices, not even the usual sound of dogs barking in the distance. It felt like the whole town had been swallowed by silence. Then I heard it, a soft sound, almost like a whisper, coming from outside. At first I thought it was the wind, but the noise didn't fade or change. It was steady, low, and rhythmic, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. My heart started to race. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there in the fog. I grabbed my phone to call my best friend, Mia, but the line wouldn't connect. No signal. That wasn't normal. Greystone might have been small, but the service was usually reliable. A knock at the door made me jump. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. The knock came again, louder this time. I walked slowly to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Peeking through the peephole, I saw nothing but fog. The fog came in quickly, faster than I had ever seen before. One moment, the sky was clear, and the next, a heavy gray mist rolled in from the hills, smothering the town in silence. It was thicker than any fog I'd seen, clinging to the windows and muffling every sound. It started as any ordinary evening. The house was quiet, and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only noise. Outside, the world was still. A cup of tea steamed on the table, its warmth spreading through the room as the book in my hand sat unread. My eyes kept drifting to the window, where the fog pressed against the glass, a living, breathing thing. There was something unnatural about it. The air outside seemed too still. No wind moved the trees, no cars rumbled down the street. Even the birds were silent. The quiet gnawed at me, making my chest tighten. I walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The street lamp at the end of the road barely pierced the mist, its light soft and eerie. Beyond it, there was nothing. No houses, no streets, only endless gray. The fog had swallowed everything. When I opened the door to step outside, the smell hit me. It was damp and earthy, like wet soil after a storm. But there was something else, a faint metallic tang, sharp and unpleasant. The air felt wrong, heavy and oppressive, as if it carried a weight I couldn't see. The first sound came then. It was faint, barely audible at first. A low, rhythmic whisper that seemed to drift through the fog. I froze, straining to hear it. It didn't sound like the wind or rustling leaves. It was too steady, too deliberate, like someone murmuring words I couldn't quite understand. I stepped back into the house and locked the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed my ear to the wood, listening. The whisper grew louder, closer, though it still sounded far away. I grabbed my phone, trying to call someone. Anyone, but there was no signal. The screen flashed no service, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. Greystone's signal was always reliable, even in storms. A knock at the door made me jump. It was soft at first, just a gentle tap, like someone testing the wood. I stayed frozen, my hand gripping the phone tightly. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I forced myself to move, creeping toward the door. My breath was shallow, my steps careful. When I reached it, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the silence. No answer. I peered through the peephole, but all I could see was fog. It swirled and shifted, almost as if it were alive. My fingers trembled as I stepped back. The knock came again, harder now, rattling the door in its I backed away, heart racing, and grabbed the nearest thing I could find for protection, a heavy flashlight from the counter. The knocking stopped suddenly, replaced by the same whispering sound. It was louder now, filling the air with its strange rhythmic hum. The sound wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was inside the house. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the kitchen, the hallway, every dark corner I could see. Nothing was there, but the whispering grew louder, echoing in my ears. It sounded closer, more distinct, but I still couldn't understand the word. Something moved in the fog outside the window, a shadow, quick and fleeting. My pulse quickened as I stared, waiting to see it again. The shadow returned, slower this time, drifting through the mist like it was searching for something. For me, I slammed the curtain shut, retreating into the middle of the room. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe I was dreaming. But the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to come from everywhere now, seeping through the walls, the floor, the very air itself. The power flickered, and the lights went out. Darkness filled the house, broken only by the pale glow of the fog outside. I gripped the flashlight tighter, its beam trembling as I moved toward the back door. If I could just get to my car, I thought, I could drive away from whatever this was. But as I opened the back door, my heart sank. The fog was thicker than ever, curling around the porch like a predator waiting to pounce. Shapes moved within it, tall, thin figures with long, twisting limbs that seemed to melt into the mist. They moved slowly, deliberately, their forms shifting and flickering as if they weren't entirely real. One of them turned toward me. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its gaze. Cold dread washed over me as the whispering grew louder, sharper, filling my head with incomprehensible words. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut and locking it. The house was no longer safe. The house felt smaller now, its walls closing in as the whispering continued. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence, filling every shadow, every corner. I pressed my back against the door, my knuckles white as I gripped the flashlight. The air in the room had changed. It was colder, heavier, almost suffocating. Each breath felt like inhaling ice, and the faint metallic scent from outside had seeped in, sharper now, like blood. The floor creaked. The sound was soft, just a faint shift of weight on the wooden boards, but it was enough to send my heart into a frenzy. I swung the flashlight toward the hallway, the beam cutting through the darkness. "Who's there?" My voice trembled, barely more than a whisper. No answer. I stepped forward, the light shaking in my hands as I moved toward the sound. The creak came again, closer this time. My pulse thundered in my ears as I reached the hallway, shining the light into the shadows. Empty. Or so it seemed. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just random noise anymore. It was voices. Dozens of them, speaking in hushed tones, overlapping and intertwining. I couldn't understand the words, but they sounded wrong. Twisted, like something mimicking human speech but failing to get it quite right. I backed away, retreating toward the living room. My foot brushed against something soft and I yelped, spinning around to shine the flashlight. It was my cat. She was lying on the floor, her body stiff and unmoving. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, and her fur was soaked with a strange dark liquid that shimmered in the light. I gagged, stumbling back. No, no, no. My voice cracked as tears blurred my vision. A knock at the front door shattered my thoughts. This time, it wasn't soft or hesitant. It was a loud, deliberate pounding that echoed through the house. The sound vibrated in my chest, each knock heavier than the last. I didn't move. I couldn't. The pounding stopped, replaced by a new sound, a scraping, like claws dragging across the wood. It started at the base of the door and slowly climbed upward, higher and higher until it reached the top. My flashlight flickered, its beam faltering before going out entirely. I smacked it against my palm, desperate for light, but it was no use. Darkness swallowed the room. Then came the voice. It was different from the whispers, louder, deeper, and more distinct. It spoke from the other side of the door, its words slow and deliberate, each syllable drawn out like it was savoring them. Let Mamie. The voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was guttural and inhuman, layered with an unnatural echo that made my skin crawl. No, I whispered, backing away from the door. Go away. The voice chuckled, a low rumbling sound that made my stomach churn. You can't. Hide, it said, the words dripping with malice. I'm already. The whispering returned, louder and more frenzied. It wasn't just outside the door anymore. It was everywhere, surrounding me, filling the house. The walls seemed to tremble, the air vibrating with the force of the voices. Shapes moved in the shadows, faint and fleeting. Just beyond the edge of my vision, I stumbled back, tripping over a chair and falling to the floor. From my position, I could see the window. The fog outside had thickened, pressing against the glass like a living thing. Dark shapes moved within it, their forms indistinct but menacing. One of them stopped. It stood directly in front of the window, its outline barely visible through the haze. It was tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long and twisted, its head tilted slightly, as if it were looking at me. The glass cracked. I scrambled to my feet, backing away as a thin, spindly hand emerged from the crack. It wasn't human. The fingers were too long, too sharp, ending in jagged claws that scraped against the glass as they pushed through. No, I whispered, shaking my head. This can't be happening. The hand withdrew, and for a moment there was silence. Then the window shattered. The fog poured in like a flood, thick and suffocating. It swirled around me, cold and damp, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. Shapes moved within it, surrounding me, their whispers growing louder and more frantic. I ran. Blind and desperate, I stumbled through the house, the fog following me like a predator. The whispers were inside my head now, filling my thoughts with their twisted words. The back door. If I could just make it to the back door, I could escape. I reached the kitchen, fumbling for the doorknob. My fingers slipped on the cold metal, and I finally wrenched it open, stumbling outside into the thick fog. The air was colder than before, biting against my skin. The shapes were everywhere now, circling me, their whispers a deafening roar. I ran blindly, my feet pounding against the wet ground as the fog seemed to pull me deeper and deeper into its embrace. I didn't know where I was going. The world around me had disappeared, swallowed by the endless gray. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. The whispers were closer now, the shapes more distinct. They weren't just shadows anymore. They had form, substance. Their limbs were impossibly long, their faces hidden behind veils of mist. One of them reached. Its hand grazed my shoulder, and an icy pain shot through my body. I screamed, stumbling forward and collapsing to the ground. The fog closed in, and the last thing I saw before everything went dark was a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the mist. Silence that was even more profound than before. My body was sprawled on something soft but damp, like moss, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. When I opened my eyes, the world around me was unrecognizable. The fog was still there, thicker than ever, but it seemed alive now. It swirled and shifted with purpose, curling around the strange, twisted trees that loomed overhead. Their branches clawed at the sky, black and jagged, their trunks pulsing faintly as if they had hearts beating inside them. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, my muscles weak. My shoulder burned where the creature's hand had touched me, and when I pulled my shirt aside, I saw a dark mark etched into my skin. It looked like a handprint, its edges blackened and faintly glowing. Panic surged through me. I scrambled to my feet, my head spinning as I looked around. This wasn't my town. This wasn't anywhere I recognized. The ground beneath me was soft and uneven, a patchwork of mud and strange, glowing plants that pulsed faintly in the gloom. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their shapes distorted by the ever-present fog. But the worst part was the silence. There were no whispers now, no sounds at all except the faint rustling of the fog as it moved. It was a silence that pressed against my ears, making my heart race with every step I took. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. I stumbled forward, my legs trembling as I pushed through the fog. The ground squelched beneath my feet, the mud clinging to my shoes as I moved deeper into the unknown. The silence didn't last. The whispers returned slowly, faint and distant at first, like the rustling of leaves. But as I walked, they grew louder, more distinct. They came from all directions, filling the air with their overlapping voices. And then I saw them. Shapes moved in the fog, their forms just as twisted and unnatural as the trees around me. They were taller than before, their limbs longer and thinner, their movements slow and deliberate. They didn't walk, they glided, their bodies drifting through the fog like smoke. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. One of them stopped, its head tilting slightly as it turned toward me. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its gaze, cold and piercing, as if it could see straight through me. Run. The thought exploded in my mind, and my body reacted before I could think. I turned and ran, my feet slipping and sliding on the muddy ground as I fled deeper into the forest. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the creatures were calling to one another. The world around me blurred as I ran, the trees twisting and warping in the fog. The ground shifted beneath my feet, turning from mud to stone to something soft and spongy that squelched with every step. I didn't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose meaning in that place, the minutes stretching into hours, the hours into an eternity. The fog never lifted, the whispers never stopped, and the shapes never stopped following me. I stumbled into a clearing, my chest heaving as I gasped for air. The fog was thinner here, and for the first time, I could see the sky. It wasn't the sky I knew. It was dark, a swirling mass of black and gray clouds that churned like a storm. Strange lights flickered within them, flashes of pale blue and sickly green that illuminated the world below. In the center of the clearing was a structure, a tall, crumbling tower made of black stone. It seemed to grow out of the ground, its surface covered in strange glowing symbols that pulsed faintly in the gloom. I didn't want to go near it, but something drew me forward. It wasn't curiosity or bravery, something deeper, more primal, as if the tower was calling to me. The whispers grew louder as I approached, their voices blending into a single, incomprehensible chant. The ground trembled beneath my feet, the air vibrating with the force of the sound. I reached the base of the tower and hesitated, my hand hovering over the smooth, cold stone. The symbols glowed brighter as I touched them, and a wave of heat surged through my body, making me stumble back. The mark on my shoulder burned. A deep, resonant voice boomed from the fog, shaking the ground and splitting the air. "You have come." I turned, my heart racing as the shapes emerged from the mist. There were dozens of them now, their forms more distinct than ever. Their limbs were impossibly long, their bodies twisting and shifting as they moved toward me. The tower pulsed with light, and the symbols began to shift, rearranging themselves into patterns I couldn't understand. The voice spoke again, louder this time, filling the air with its presence. "You will serve, or you will be." The creatures closed in, their glowing eyes fixed on me. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that drowned out my thought. I pressed my back against the tower, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't let them take me. The voice spoke one final time, its tone cold and final. "Choose." I closed my eyes, my breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The ground trembled beneath me, the fog swirling around my body as the creatures reached for me. And then, everything went dark.